Good evening, everyone. I'm Zamero, and welcome to Vout-O-Reenee, with special thanks to Jan Fink, the director, for not sure where he is, for hosting us tonight. Tonight is, in fact, the first collaboration between Salon Noir, which is an art salon that has hosted guest speakers such as Gavin Turk, Pandemonia and Matthew Collins, and a new art group that is called Mirage. So after tonight's talk, which should last, I don't know, about 30, 40 minutes, something like that, there will be a private view of the Mirage exhibition in the Stash Gallery, which is through the hallway there. You're all invited to stay for that, and to join us for drinks at the bar. Then after about half an hour into the private view, there will be an 80s disco here in the bar area, but the gallery will remain a quiet space, so you have a choice. The Mirage artists, I'll just mention something about each one of them briefly. In no particular order, we have Nick Malone. He is an FR... yeah, you can bow to the audience. He is an FRSA and has exhibited at the Royal Society of Arts, the 53rd Venice Biennale, and the Carousel du Louvre. And we have Gary Myatt. Unfortunately, he can't be with us tonight. He was commissioned to paint canvases that are permanently on show, alongside Damien Hirst's sculptures at a Mayfair club called Bacchanalia. And we have Sarah Lloyd. She recently graduated from the Royal College of Art and previously was awarded the British Institution Prize for Painting. I can't see Sarah, but she could wave there. There we are. Thank you, Sarah. And we have Julia Elmore. She co-curated the British Outsider Art Movement exhibition at Al Saint-Pierre in Paris. And we have Sankara.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
There we are, Sankara stands up for you. He had a solo at the Van Gogh Gallery in Madrid, and through them has exhibited at various locations in Europe. And myself, I've exhibited twice at the Liverpool Biennale, and my work's been featured a number of times in the Evening Standard, Londoner's Diary, and many other publications. So now to formally introduce our distinguished panel of guest speakers, whom we are delighted to host for this evening's discussion, which is broadly about the theme of the Mirage exhibition, and the theme is Artist as Sorcerer, Creating Realities. So, please hold your questions until after all three speakers have finished, and hopefully there will be time for questions and answers at the end. So, the speakers, who I'm going to introduce, we have Sacha Craddock, yeah. Slightly in the way I am. Sacha is behind me. You'll be able to see her very well when I finish. Sacha is an independent art critic, writer and curator, and is also president of the International Association of Art Critics UK. She was also the chair of the board of New Contemporaries. Sacha has judged many art prizes, including the Turner Prize and the John Moores Painting Prize. And currently, Sacha is guest curator at Plataforma in Guadalajara, Mexico, and I hope I've pronounced that properly.
You did.
I did. I had to Google that. How do you say Guadalajara? Right, so we've got through that one. Also, we have Tabish Khan. Tabish is an art critic, speaker, podcaster, and curator, and he believes passionately in making art accessible to everyone. Now, he does this by visiting hundreds of exhibitions a year to keep informed about the art scene. Tabish has been the visual arts editor for Londonist since 2013 and is a regular contributor to FAD with the weekly top exhibitions. He has written for Artsy, Elephant and New York Observer, and has appeared on radio and TV. And we have Jean Wainwright. Jean Wainwright is a professor, art historian, critic and curator whose area of expertise is contemporary art and photography, with particular interest in Andy Warhol. Her audio art archive, which numbers over 2,000 interviews, continues, and 177 of these are in Tate archives. Jean has published numerous essays, has appeared on radio and TV programmes, and has curated a number of international exhibitions. And in her tutoring and mentoring, she supports both emerging and established artists and writers. So now I would like to hand you over to our speakers, and I wish you all a great evening. Let's give them a round of applause.
Just make sure I'm not blocking my slides. Can everyone hear me on this microphone?
Yes.
Brilliant. I have a tendency to move about, so if I suddenly get out of microphone range, just someone wave at me from the back to tell me to get back to it. I have the pleasure of going first. Annie's already introduced me. I'm Tabish Khan, or sometimes better known by my Instagram handle at London Art Critic. I have the pleasure of going first, which I always feel like it's a blessing and a curse. So the blessing is that you're at your most lucid, because you're ready to engage. The curse is you're also at your most sober, and therefore be more inquisitive and ask questions about what I say and pick up on any mistakes I make. So today what I'm going to do is, the theme of the name of the exhibition is Mirage. So I'm going to take you through the artists in the exhibition. I wrote the exhibition catalogue for it. And I'm going to take you on a series of journeys, or should we say mirages, through their worlds to explore what they're working on, but also I will add my own twist on them. So when I say this is what I see in their work, it may not necessarily be what they see, but it's what I see, and that's kind of how art evolves, that we all see something different in each artist, and I hope you find it very interesting, and I'll try to keep to my 10 minutes as well. So first up, we have Malone, who was introduced to us earlier, and you can see his work in the exhibition. All the works that I'm going to show you, you should be able to see in the exhibition after the talk. And his world is a kind of a world of almost make-believe, because it revolves around a story of two individuals called Eustace and Makepeace, who grow up together and their lives intertwine in some sort of Shakespearean tragedy. I won't actually spoil any more of that story, because I think you need to explore Nick's work and talk to him about it to understand how that story evolves. But what I like about his work is that there's lots of elements to it that you don't quite know what's going on. You have to build your own narrative to it. So you see this kind of world of like sharks, and you see birds, and you see figures, and it's some in black, some in white, and there are words that you can't quite make out. And it's kind of a world where you have to imagine, what do you feel like in it? So when you see the white, it's an interesting thing, because when people see white, they either find it soothing and comforting, or they find it cold and clinical. And I think it can make people go in two different ways. I think there's a psychological experiment where they say, if you suddenly woke up in a white room, how would you feel? And that's always a way of telling people how they react to this kind of surprise of being in a white room. Some people think, oh, they associate with death, and they're like, oh, I'm scared. And others are like, well, it's just woken up in a different place, you know. Babies do it all the time. It's probably why they all forget their memories, because, you know, if you wake up and suddenly you're in the aisle 3 of Sainsbury's, it could be disconcerting, but it's a good thing they don't remember that when they grow up. And while you're contemplating to yourself, like, what would I feel like in this world, I am going to unceremoniously wrench you away and take you into the next world, which is very different. And it's the world of Sarah Lloyd, where we go into this world of, now we're starting to get something a bit more, pictures are coming to focus. We're starting to see a world that's a bit more verdant, it's green, but it's still a bit surreal. We've got a red horse and a blue tree and a lounging figure, and it makes you feel like you're connecting with nature a bit more. And that's, for me, something that us Londoners, well, I'm a born and bred Londoner, we miss a lot, because when you're in nature, there is something that you get of feeling connection that we're missing in the urban environment. You know, we're downstairs in a bar, it's a beautiful bar, but when you're around plants and trees, it feels different. You know, if you take your shoes off and put your feet in the leaf litter, it feels different, and you feel much more engaged with art. And it's strange. It's actually one of those things where we humans always like to think of ourselves as slightly different from the rest of the animal kingdom. And if you ever corner me at a private view, I have a whole litany of animal facts. But my favourite one is, or one of my favourite ones, is that it's been scientifically proven, or not, scientifically speculated, that they think that bears have a sense of natural beauty. In that they have been spotted just sat there at vistas with viewpoints, just staring out at the lake and the mountains, and nobody knows why they do it. And some people wonder whether it's because they have this sense that it's beautiful and we're just going to stop, which is what we humans do all the time. You know, we look at beautiful things and we look around us. So I feel like there is something inherent in our evolution that connects us to nature, and every time we see works that have a sense of nature in it, we'll feel a connection. And while last time I kind of wrenched you from one world to the other, this time is more of a horizontal step. As we go into the world of Julia Elmore, where we've got waterfalls and rainbows and things that we're a bit more familiar with. And we were just talking before this talk, and I've recently come back from Iceland, which is a land with many, many waterfalls and many, many beautiful landscapes. And it looks a bit like this, so that's what it kind of reminded me of that. And I always feel like when you look at these things, I always think that you should close your eyes and sort of try and take in what it smells like to be like amongst nature in the forest, you know. And I don't mean just, you know, the smell of that little tree-shaped air freshener in your car, but the real forest smell, you know, what it actually feels like. And that's what I feel like when I see these works. I feel like I want to feel like we're in that place. And whenever I think of this, I also think of the inner turmoil, because waterfalls and flowing water in art can also represent how we feel inside. Because, you know, we all go through life, we all have difficult times. We have smoother times when the water's flowing and it's smoothing, and then we have the waterfalls where it gets all turbulent. And we all go through these phases in our life, and I think I sometimes see this in the art that I'm looking at. And as three great contemporary philosophers once said to me, you know, when it comes to your approach to life, you know, don't go chasing waterfalls, just stick to the rivers and the lakes that you know. And I think you might have to be of a certain age to understand that reference, but I hope it lands with some of you. And then we move into the more figurative world of Sankara, and I think of this, and this is also showing the age that I grew up in. When I see this, my first thought was Tron and the light cycles. And there is something, a very sci-fi, futuristic aesthetic about it. But because he keeps the background unclear, you can't really put a time and a place to these people. So, like, what are they? What's their story? What are they? Where are they? What's happening? Why are they wearing helmets? What's happening in their lives? What's their jobs? What are their lives and aspirations? We don't know. And it's for us to kind of speculate about where they're heading. So that's what I found fascinating about this, and the kind of clean colours always reminds me of like Michael Craig Martin's work as well. So that's it, and we're now firmly ensconced in the figurative world. And our next artist is Gary Myatt, and I look at this and I think, I love this top corner picture, because in my mind I'm like, are those guys, have they finally lost it, or are they having the best time, you know? Are those the guys I want to be hanging out with, or are those guys, or maybe they're the guys I want to be hanging out with for about half an hour, and after half an hour I'm like, I think I've had my share, you know. I think they're going to party all night. I need to be in bed at 10 p.m, you know. So, and I love how he's created this world that feels relatable, but also the figures are made out of clay. And when I think of clay, I always think something biblical about where we all come from, or the earth. And it's great that he's created this little world, but it feels like we're coming back to the normal world. And this is the kind of cycle I want to take you all on. And then when we get to our final artist, who gracefully introduced us, Annie, now we're kind of getting closer to the real world. So if you look at these works, I'm sure that there'll be something familiar for you to see in all of them. You know? A man that famously can't sweat. A famous migrant who's bizarrely anti-migrant, being shipped off in an old boat, a little boat. I mean, it depends how dark you want to go, but I'll leave it up to you to decide whether you want him to drown or survive. And then last but not least, we have the Grand Wizard of the President of the United States, with his burning cross to hand. And now we're kind of coming closer to the real world, and that's where I wanted to end it and bring you back to. But what I wanted to do before I finish was read a quote from the catalogue essay that I wrote, because I thought it sums it up really well. And that is, what is reality really? In the desert, a mirage shimmers on the horizon, not quite there, not quite gone, suspended between what we see and what we know. The 6 artists in Mirage share this fascination with spaces, where certainty dissolves and the boundaries between real and imagined blur like heat haze above hot asphalt. And that's all I wanted to say. I just want to say thank you for listening. Thank you very much. I'm now just going to hand you over to Jean.
Thank you so much, and that leads me very neatly into the theme of this evening. And I was thinking of the theme, which is artist as sorcerer, and also a question that Annie put in our original emails, which is, what extent does an artist create another reality simply by altering our perception of a hitherto familiar object? And I also thought about how Mirage artists explore, and I quote, experience, showing how memory, imagination and observation interweave into consciousness itself. Now weirdly, those statements led me thinking about Andy Warhol, because I was thinking how, and you may disagree, he transformed not only products, so we think of the soup can and the Brillo boxes, etc., but he also transformed not only popular imagery, and commented on society with his mouse, his electric chairs, which I'm going to talk a tiny bit about later, in different colourways, which changed our perception, but also changed his image with his white wig. He had a factory, which becomes a kind of alternative society in from 1963 to 68. And then also, he all the time playing the commercial world. So he's negotiating, he's kind of almost like a sorcerer, I think. So I want to address the subject through two different points. And one is how Warhol used his voice or non-voice in opposition to critically talk about his work. Because it made me think about how artists often are having to talk about their work, and how do you do that? How do you negotiate that, what goes out into the wider world? And his inherent shyness caused a very clever transformation. So although people didn't really believe that he said anything beyond great or really, every book or catalogue has quotes from him. So how is that possible? But he understood the power of intonation, and also the way that critics and the press have their own agendas, and that the interview is always a loaded negotiation of interest, intent and desire. Now, I talked to Glenn O'Brien, one of the editors of Interview magazine, and he said how clever Andy was, because he never said anything was bad. He always said everything was great, and I'm quoting from him. But he had many ways of saying great. So you knew if it was awful, really great, absolutely hated it, or thought it was great just by his intonation. And the clever thing was, he never said anything was bad. So he thought that was a rather brilliant, smart strategy. But he was painfully aware that his own inarticulacy, see, I can't even say the word, that's very good example of getting tripped up by the voice, by claiming always he had nothing to say and asking interviewers to provide both the questions and the answers, or by answering with just one word. And so, for example, on the screen I've got a very important interview that happened in 1966 for Artists Today, where he keeps repeating that he can't think of anything to say and says, why don't you tell me the words and they'll just come out of my mouth. And you can provide the questions and the answers too. You should watch it. It's rather marvellous. But, of course, he understood that that's what it was all about in a way. And, of course, he cared about the interview. That's why he had nothing to say, because he knew what he had to say was important. So he wanted, that was interesting and quite surreal. So he wanted Solomon's questions to be answered by Solomon, because he knew he had an agenda. But I think as well there's another revealing insight into Warhol's psychological engagement with the interviews is exposed in a conversation he had with Edie Sedgwick, who was one of his superstars, in 1965. And he gives the impression that he's counselling her for her forthcoming Life magazine interview, recommending that she saves all her cleverness and all her little quirky things for really important interviews and doesn't get too nervous about it, because he says it doesn't really matter because whatever you say will come out different. He also repeats his perception in his book, his famous philosophy book. So I was thinking of The Sorcerer and Transformation as Philosopher. So Warhol did this book, The Philosophy of Anti-Warhol, in 1973, and a lot of the quotes, almost all the quotes we see on walls in endless exhibitions and everything, come from this quote. Did he actually say them? You can talk to me later about that, as I have listened to the recordings, which are now embargoed. Anyway, in the in the philosophy book, he says to Pat Hackett, who redacts many of, has many conversations with him, they know what you want to, they know what they want to write about you, and they know what they think about you, even before they even talk to you. So they're just looking for words and details from here and there to back up what they've already decided they're going to say. If you go into an interview blind, which is what Warhol liked doing, there's absolutely no way of guessing what kind of article the person you're talking to is going to write. I used to give different information to different magazines because it was like putting a tracer where people got their information from. Sometimes went rather wrong. And another quick example is from David Bailey, which I was also thinking of the philosophical element of sorcery, of David Bailey when he made his 1973 ATV programme with Warhol. And in the original filming of it and the transcript, which is verbatim from the actual programme, Bailey got somebody to play the role of Warhol, and Warhol lip synches, so he got somebody to play him. And in this lovely little interplay on the programme, Bailey says, is it true to the person pretending to be Warhol, and then Warhol is lip syncing to what he's saying, is it true you never say anything, Andy? Warhol, this is very metaphysical, David, if you ask me. Bailey, what does metaphysical, can you say that word again? Warhol, metaphysical. What does that word mean? Well, it's happening and sort of not happening. What's not happening? Warhol, here I am conducting an interview with you, and you're asking me why I don't say anything. And Bailey says, rather puzzled, well, you're not saying anything, are you? And the pretend Warhol says, I certainly am. Bailey says, what are you saying? I'm answering your questions. Now, I don't want to labour the point, but basically, Warhol clearly has a great understanding of the power relationship that happens in an interview. And he intrinsically understood that interviews were not spontaneous, they weren't natural conversations in a way implied by layout in transcripts and newspapers. And anybody who's ever done an interview knows that there's a negotiation. If you're having a conversation, a literal conversation often comes out rather differently because you negotiate things between each other, or there is an interpretation and it comes out as a catalogue essay or different things. So Warhol did two things: a novel, which was literal taping of someone for 24 hours, although it was done in 3 sessions, so that was a conceit, or the philosophy, which was much more focused, where there were discussions about what philosophy meant and how he would go forward with it. And I just wanted to talk a tiny bit, just for a couple of minutes, because I could talk for a long time about Warhol's philosophy. But a recent interview I did with Bob Colacello a couple of years ago was about how the philosophy, the original conversations for the philosophy book. And Bob said, you know, and Bob Colacello was the person who was the editor of Interview magazine. He said, you know, he said to him, what you should write, Andy, is you should write your philosophy. And Andy said, what a great idea. Oh, Bob, you should start tomorrow. It's so interesting. Now, said Bob Colacello to me, people always said, you should write a memoir. You should write an autobiography. And he said, I don't want to do that. Well, there were many reasons for that, because he was always about this kind of hiding and exposing and hiding. But, he said, somehow Warhol focused on this notion of a philosophy, which shows that, even at the time, he knew that his work had a kind of philosophical component. And we got Pat Hackett on board, and she did all the scrapbooks. Now, I've got, we've got about 10 minutes each, so I wanted to finish by looking at 2 works that are kind of transformative of Warhol's, and one of them rather problematic, and it's been written about a lot, and it's Race Riot. Of course, it wasn't a race riot at all that Warhol took the original idea from. So he saw these Charles Moore photographs in Life magazine. He thought they were very dynamic. He was engaged with the subject far more than perhaps has been really acknowledged. And he made these screen prints in different colours, in pinks and lemony yellows, and there's something about the dynamic and transformation of these photographs of Charles Moore. They had a rather kind of troubling and upsetting statement underneath by Charles, which actually said what had happened, which was dreadful, a peaceful riot that turns into a ghastly atrocity. And somehow Warhol puts it out there, and I think when you see it, there's been a lot written about it, but it's something about the transforming of something that happened that's been mediated by a newspaper, by Life magazine, from a series of photographs of a person who was a witness, that is somehow transformed. And on the other screen, we've got the Macintosh logo. Now, that in itself, and again, one of the things about that Annie first was talking about was this idea of transformation. And Warhol, right from the beginning, was interested in brands. What do brands do? What do they say? But he takes them and he plays with them. This is actually a photograph I took in my recent Warhol show that I did, a retrospective called Andy Warhol, My True Story. Well, there isn't a true story, but anyway. And what was interesting about this is that Warhol, when this work was actually made, which was 1985, had a year before he had gone to a party at Sean Lennon was having his birthday party, and Yoko invited him and he went along, and Sean had been given the first home computer and he was sitting on the floor with actually Steve Jobs. And Warhol said he saw this kid sitting on the floor and he was rather jealous. He was like, who is this trendy guy who's just done this wonderful computer? And Steve Jobs said to him, you know, I've written to you, but you never wrote back. Well, of course, the reason why Warhol hadn't written back, he was actually working with a different computer company, but he didn't admit that. But the next year, he did a portfolio of works called Ads. And this is one that didn't make it into the portfolio because he slightly changed it in the final version. So this is kind of off-print, if you like. And what he did was take this brand, but again, turns it into almost this apple against the sunset. And in a way, that ability, whether it's, and we can all think of Warhol's works, whether it's a dollar sign, you know, and his quip, love turned into the dollar sign, well, that was rather interesting. There's this kind of idea always of taking something, transforming it into something else. You know, Mao, Chairman Mao, he does this series. This is a series of prints, not the actual screen prints. These are prints and edition prints. But he takes Mao and he turns him into something else. And so I think there's always that element of transformation, of course, in art. And I think it's at the very core of what artists do. They take things that interest them and they transform them. And I wanted to end actually with a quote from Donna da Silva, and the reason is because I think it was a very interesting quote. And Donna da Silva is the adjunct director of the Dyer Foundation, and she said, you know, artists are under no obligation to speak. That's what their work does.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening. I have absolutely... Okay, shall I let people talk for a little bit? I'm utterly delighted to be here. We can turn that off.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I thought about bringing images, but I think the images we've just had are absolutely useful. But often people are slavish to the image. They're staring at that, and you're saying something really clever, and these things don't equate. And actually we have an exhibition next door, which is what I've been invited to talk about. So I started to sort of think about going in a different way. So the Mirage group, as such, has an exhibition and a statement. And obviously I'm getting a bit confused between the kind of exhibition here and the notion of a group. But I want to unpick certain things with you. So the group, or the people exhibited here, plus some more, are trying to provide an alternative sort of gauge for contemporary art. And I want to sort of question that, or at least go through that as a notion, and deal with some of the work individually, and then ask some of the questions I always ask about really what we're all doing here in terms of contemporary art. So perhaps the concept of the work here is against a sort of conceptual dryness, wanting to provide a sense of the immediate, a sense of experience, as opposed to something received through another kind of logic. And also we used in the writing about the Mirage artist, the notion of otherworldliness. And we need to understand and characterize that. So there is a range of media here, but in a way a lot of the work attempts to be very central, very singular, and there's not really the kind of work that I used to teach, particularly the kind of work that was made that I would teach, especially in sculpture at the Royal College, which was all about what if I did this? It's all about being in the process of making as opposed to the result. So what could be, and especially with sculpture, that's a great thing with sculpture because it's very hard when you're a sculptor to end up with what it is, because it can be a bit heartbreaking for the artist. So we've gone from Sam Kara's work, which actually when I looked at it on the website looked like a lot more groovy, but it's actually much more interesting in real life, with fantastic relationship to line, and then very graphic but a drawn line with a very bold solid colour in between. So I think it's likened by you to Michael Craig Martin, but I think it's kind of less dead than Michael in some way. So there is possibility there. So I'm just saying, for God's sake, realise how good that is.
It is.
And then of course Nick Malone's work I actually know, and the whole thing is that he has managed to construct a whole bloody narrative that is just a world that within which certain things can work, certain things don't, certain things are a graphic novel, and so on. A very clever artist in that if you have a major rationale, you can be within that forever. The doubt is slightly less palpable. So you know, and for instance here in this show there are sort of things that do not really have that relationship to the narrative or the story in the same way. So they're different. Anyway, I'm not going to go through them all, but and I will later in a minute to some. So, and then there is this kind of work which is in a way, in the imagery, is about sort of almost like three-dimensional graphic use of clay. But then this kind of rather, I can't remember whose work, he's not here, but sort of this kind of clay construct and collage, and then a sort of grandiose context, and then a sort of slightly flippant farting through. So, and then we have a sort of heightened extreme cartoon or caricature, which kind of merges Glenn Brown with Ferrarese School, which is yours, and that's putting it nicely, but it's very kind of like a combination of funny, but artistically forever. And how do we combine those? And so I will talk about that in a bit. So, okay, the artist is sorcerer. Well, I really don't go for that, really. The idea of magical powers. Obviously, art is incredibly powerful and different. And I'm just going to read this out to you. To make something normal abnormal. This is how we get great promotion, for instance. But what is being pushed forward? God, I've lost my thing. Okay, blah, blah, blah. All right, I haven't gone into that, right. So the aim of the group is to provide an alternative gauge. So, okay, let's talk about groups. Obviously, Bauhaus was a kind of moment in a group because there was a manifesto and the whole idea. And anyway, anyone could be avant-garde in those days. I mean, it was the avant-garde, the idea of an avant-garde. Obviously, this work is absolutely denying the notion of avant-gardism, which is a great relief. But then you could have something which is called a group, which is the YBAs, which are a complete construction of a combination of the London Tourist Board and New Labour. to sort of create this idea of like groovy London. So then we had like the 60s, and then we had like the 90s. It's absolute nonsense, and the people involved resented every kind of characterization. People who are anti-intellectual, that hunted in packs, that hung out. But in a way, that's just a beginning of a characterization of artists as being anti-intellectual, as being behavioral, and behaving like artists, and the press could then stop being critical, which is what I was before, but start being lifestyle, and like it's just like everyone's doing this stuff. So that was terrible. But the group here, you know, self-proclaimed, is of like-minded people, and also, and I feel that what you have here is this grouping, is the sense that when I was at art school, and when I taught at art school, but when I was first there, I knew what I wasn't before I knew what I was. You really, the whole point is I am not that kind of artist. And in a way, you say you're not that kind of artist. In the end, you might find what kind of artist you are. So it's about a sort of negative construction. I'm not suggesting that's here, but there might be a sense of that. So I assume this work is different in nature to that in the current exhibition at Sprout Magaz, which is a particularly, which is called Seriously. And it's like over 100 artists of very famous kind of conceptual artists. I'll give you the list. So we, you know, where over 100 artists are included in a crowded, quite funny, much processed photography, flying through the air, burying yourself over time. The great film by John Smith, Woman Chewing Gum, where actually the everyday is commented on, where it's sort of, I'd like the woman to turn left. Well, of course he's seen the film before, so you get the idea of narrative plus the construction of that. So it's very funny. And so wit, slapstick, subversiveness, and how images are constructed and interpreted, which is in a way what artists are constantly looking for, the notion of language and so on. So Bastian Ada, Keith Arnott, Steve Floyer, David Lamanas, all the people. So this show is perhaps about a more direct approach, apparently unmediated. So it's not about the notion of language, but of course it is. So I'm just talking about how things have things in common and they don't. But let's deal mainly with the notion of intention. And much of my teaching in art school, or much teaching in art school, not mine, but teaching in art school is very much based at a very low level with listening to what the person intends to do and then getting cross with the intention and very seldom linking the thing that's made with that intention and seeing they've got nothing in common, which actually might make the art work. So in other words, the gap is the point. And so this is something that I want to posit to you. So, you know, I've come across enough tutors being incredibly lazy. So, you know, the result. So argue with the intention, seldom see whether the result, actually the work, matches with the intention. As I said, I feel the gap is what makes things work. Art is a language, but it does not speak the same as other languages. It's completely bloody different, and it works in a different way. I just, an artist I want to talk about is, who died in 1999, the painter Prunella Clough, who I'm a very great supporter, and I love her work, and I knew her well. And she was neither abstract nor figurative. She refused to involve herself in any of this kind of language. She was very discreet, very English. Oh, well, no, I don't know. It's that sort of thing, very well brought up. When she died in 1999, there was a sort of moment's silence about it. And then there was the notion of understanding her work. And art historians started understanding the context and so on. Prunella's work should not be understood like concrete boots of somebody thrown over into the Thames and to sink. I mean, the work is not about understanding in that very crass way. That's why we make work or write about it, because it shouldn't be understood in that crass way. And also it shouldn't be interesting as well. Your combination of Rowlandson cartoon and Glenn Brown, you know, cloth, do we, in the making, as Tabish says, bordering on performance art, or does Nick Malone, with the extended space between fiction and blurred fact, trying to find place where understanding is broken? The play between text and watercolour collage and tough imagination hopes for the loss of direction, but also hopes for a strong access. So when Tabish talks about reality, obviously you must not be boring and say, oh, by the way, I always swore, and they're all going to be bored, but I do want to ask the question, you know, while a genocide is going on, should we not indulge in this work? I think we should. I think what we should do is bear in mind real politics, but not feel the need to illustrate for a guilty world. But I think we should be politically very, I'm sorry, it's very boring for all of you, but I've sworn I would never give a talk, and I give a lot without talking about this. I'll just tell you a story. We must defend art, and we must discuss the difficulty of it. And we must make sure that while institutions, in a way, are underfunded, students don't have any money. I mean, when I went to art school, I got bloody paint thrown at me. Obviously, I was the last one to get it, so it was always green. So I had to do green paintings. But, you know, the privilege I have compared to people at art school now. And I think we should really fight to make sure people that are able to go to art school, and that people like me can be really critical and outspoken, because the problem is you can't be critical and you end up condescending to the people who do have less. And so there's this, oh, it's all right, oh, she's all right. Her father died last year or something like that. Well, I don't care. I mean, you know, I'm seeing this work. So, blah, 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 formalism, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you know, another thing is that it's very important to experience work. I mean, obviously it's very hard for people who can't get to something and they have to deal with representation. But as much the relationship to the experience as opposed to the third-hand understanding is very important. And I know you've been very involved in salons, and I ran a salon for years at Blacks as well. And so I refuse to allow that to be recorded in any way. So the people who were there experienced that thing, and there was no accountability. Sarah Lloyd's work is about process, mystical, about working away and trying to bloody bring some kind of meaning out of iconography. So the icon in the middle, and so on. The most important thing is to defend education. And then a little story. Many years ago, when I was organising to support artists in Palestine, I was in Ramallah, and this is just to kind of answer the notion of subject. Ramallah with two young artists then in the beginning of the Second Intifada, which is 2001 or something, and they said, oh my God, are we fed up with doing work about the struggle? You know, what we want to do is go to Egypt, go to a hotel, drink a lot, and paint still lives. So in other words, I'm just trying to bring up some things that might be questioning for you. Okay.
Thank you, Sacha.
So thank you very much to all three speakers. If anyone's got a question, now's your chance to ask the speakers, and hopefully they'll be able to answer you.
Yes. Questions?
There's someone with their hand up there. Are we going to... is there a roving mic?
This one. I have a loud voice.
Oh, right, okay.
Just
It's
ask.
really simple. Why was Warhol's writing redacted?
Oh, the tapes. The record. Oh, well, it's a very interesting point. So I had complete access to the recordings, to over 4,000 of his recordings. I didn't listen to all of them. They were on cassette tape, so you can imagine working with that kind of technology. But I studied them and I did my PhD on them in the 90s and actually at the beginning of the century now. And when I finished it, I got a book contract. And then I got an email from the museum and they said, oh, we didn't think you want to write about these recordings or do anything with your research. They've all been embargoed for 50 years. So, why? Well, I think it's because they haven't really been studied. Warhol didn't ask permission to record. He would just have his recorder set down, dinner parties, he called it his wife that travelled with him. And, basically, a lot of people are still alive that are on those recordings. He never had any permission from anybody, even though he never hid the recorder. He didn't do covert recordings. People knew that he was doing it. So I think that's the reason why. They don't really know what's on them. And I think until they do, they can have people who can go through them. So at the moment, if you want to listen to them, you can fly to Pittsburgh. You can, if you already know what you want to listen to, you can request a recording. You can go to a room with no notepad, nothing. You sit there and you listen, and then afterwards you can make your notes. So very Warholian, I'll say, but there you go. Thank you.
Better than the external tapes, potentially.
If everyone's desperate to grab a drink, so maybe if we just wrap it up and then we'll be around for a while and you can ask us any questions. So enjoy the rest of your evening.